Welcome to Romera Records, a virtual cast. Today we have on Mark. How's it going, man?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me, Jackson.
Awesome. So yeah, basically just got you from Pod Match, just like a lot of people, and uh, just saw what you do and interested in that. So if you could just go ahead, get right into like who you are, what you do,
hmm
and how you got started.
Yeah. So who I am and what I do, like it's fun. Isn't it funny that, like what you do tends to be the starting point for conversation? Like I meet you somewhere. So Jackson, what do you do? But we also I'll answer that and then we can, I guess, kind of flesh out who I am. What I do, I do a number of things. So I've had my own business for about 14 years now. I do a number of things. I'm an author, a speaker, a consultant, a coach, podcaster. And then there's also a software company that I've worked with for almost 13 years, enterprise software company called KaiNexus that I think has graduated from being a startup to being just a established, growing small company. So it's been great to be part of KaiNexus. So I would consider myself an entrepreneur, I guess, between my own business, KaiNexus. I've done a lot of entrepreneurial things, not just writing, but then also becoming a publisher of books, being a podcaster. And so, I think any project, we can think of that as a startup. So I like doing new things. And, I think in general, I would describe the work that I'm doing is management consulting, working with leaders, working with teams to really try to help improve operations and culture and leadership within an organization. Those are really, I think, some of the keys to success. So I've seen that in the auto industry and other manufacturing, two different startup software companies, and consulting. A lot of that consulting's been in healthcare. So I've been fortunate to have a lot of career detours, or at least some of the through lines are helping people lead better, helping people improve better. Those are things I'm kind of passionate about, which is getting into, I guess, a little bit of, who am I?
Yeah, and those are all definitely like characteristics that are very similar. You must enjoy speaking with people and communicating with people because you can't really do those specific career fields if you aren't able to communicate with people. I guess let's go to like your coaching, right? Your coaching and business stuff. So who's the audience? Who's the people that you are usually working with? The clients, I mean.
Yeah, it could be, executives in health systems. It could be, business owners in smaller businesses. I try to really play, I like to use the word coach because I think the word consultant usually implies somebody coming in and telling you what to do or coming in and giving you the answer. Like to me, coaching is a lot more collaborative. I think between my engineering roots and business school and mentors and experiences I've had, I think I'm a pretty good problem solver. Maybe not having the utmost confidence in my problem solving ability makes me a better problem solver, of not being overconfident, but trying to embrace the idea, whether it's in a startup or in a big existing business, that everything we do is an experiment. So I like to work with executives and even frame the coaching as an experiment. Let's try this. Let's see what you think of how it's going and our relationship, and are we making progress? And take it from there. So I like to think of what I'm doing as collaborative problem solving. That involves as much listening as it does talking. I mean, I think I bring some frameworks to people who might be a little bit lost around, well, how do I solve some of these problems? Try to help them avoid the trap of just trying a bunch of random things. But let's work together. One thing I've learned and I try to help others with is, before jumping into solutions mode, we've got to really understand the problem really well. What are the causes of the problem? Is there a root cause, or are there different causes? Like big complex problems, like why is our business not performing well? There's usually not one single root cause, and there's not going to be one silver bullet solution. So I think, working with people to sort of frame that exploration of, let's define the problem really well, and then let's start working on improvements and evaluating those improvements. That's part of that process that I like to take people through.
Yeah, I think that it's it's always great when somebody who is an expert at something, when they seem like they're unsure of themselves. And
Mhm.
I actually learned that, or I heard that from somebody, and I was like, thank you. Like, because I work as an automation engineer where I have to solve manufacturing problems and troubleshoot electrical issues. And a lot of times I don't know like what the problem is,
Mhm.
and I'm like the guy to go to. And I think it's just so funny because like people will ask me to like, hey, we got an issue with this, what's going on? I'm like, I don't know. Like, let me
Yeah, right,
give me time to even find out what you're even talking about. I don't even know what you're
right.
talking about. And
Yeah.
so, and then like there are some peers that I work with who are just like insanely intelligent. And then
Mhm.
I'll ask them, I'll kind of do to them what people are doing to me. And then they're like, that's crazy. Like that's interesting. I'm just like, oh, you don't know either.
Yeah,
So it's always
uh,
great when people have that mindset
yeah.
because that tells you how smart they are. And I think
Mhm.
the smarter
Mhm.
you are, the more you realize when to be stupid or when to be dumb. Because somebody
Yeah,
who is actually dumb or smart, I think that they think that they just have to be the smartest person all the time. Like, oh,
well,
I know what the answer is. I know what this is. But it's like
yeah,
sometimes you don't. And the
yeah.
smarter you are, the more you'll realize you don't know everything.
And I think some of that, yeah, you're totally right. Some of that comes with experience also. But I think there's two dimensions. There's, dumb to smart, and then there's kind of, the different dimension, know it all or learn it all.
Yeah.
Someone could be a smart know it all, and they probably don't know it all. And we see people in the business world that seem to think they know everything about everything. Um, People can fill in names of somebody that might come to mind, from that description. And then there are dumb people who think they know it all. And I'm not sure which is more dangerous. Maybe smart people who think they know it all are more dangerous because they can actually do stuff. But there's a difference between, like, intelligence and, you have to be careful, like, as an engineer, being blunt or whatever with people, like, you're not dumb, you're just ignorant. Like, those are two different things,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It still doesn't sound nice.
Yeah. Yeah, I do find it refreshing though when there are people out there who, as I said, they're just smart enough to know that there are either other ways to solving a problem, or they're smart enough to know that they just don't know everything, so that they're willing to
Mhm.
to take the chance to find out a better way, and
Yeah,
especially if you're in the coaching position that you're in,
yeah.
because it's like not everybody's the same. So if you created some program that was like cookie cutter and then
Mm,
tried to use it on every client you get,
mm.
they're like, "Hey, we've been doing everything you told us to do, but nothing's working."
Yeah.
Then you would need to have that open mind on how to help out them
Mhm.
specifically because you're in that specific.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think there's some things that are knowable. Like, there's certain elements, branches of engineering. If we were going to build a bridge, you can do the calculations of how much weight that bridge is going to hold. Like, that's knowable. I don't know that. I'm not that kind of engineer, but thankfully somebody in society is. And they know that. But there are a lot of things that are less knowable. And so I think one of the most important things I've learned in my career, and sometimes I'll use the phrase, I've heard others say it, I'm a recovering engineer. Because I think a lot of your education is about finding the answer. Well, I've got the right answer. I know it's right. That should be good enough. But like, you get more than two people together and an organization gets complicated, right? And frustrations, especially early in my career, of like, why does the best technically correct solution not always win? I'm like, people are complicated. There's a lot to be learned about engaging people and influencing them, and being right is helpful, but often not enough. So I think a lot of the situations I work with are in the realm of um, problems that aren't solved by doing a calculation. So I think one of the most helpful things I've learned in my career is instead of saying, I have a solution, I know I'm right, let's go implement it, to say things like, this is, geeky language that not everyone likes, but to say, I have a hypothesis. If we do these things and test this countermeasure, I predict we're going to get some positive results. Let's go run the experiment.
Hmm.
That's a really helpful mindset. Anything around like, how do you increase the size of your podcast audience? Nobody knows the answer. People will try to sell you cookie cutter solutions, but then I think a lot of it is just an experimental process of doing things. I think if I if I come up with catchier titles for each episode, that will help. And then you could go test that hypothesis. Now, some of that takes time, and it's hard. It's a slower process than going and trying, that easy bake solution. But yeah, I don't know. Sometimes somebody says, I know the answer. They could be right. They could be wrong. How do we know that? Anyway, just throwing random questions back at you now.
Yeah, I mean, I'm always a big proponent of just try people's suggestions. So like if you are helping a client and they're like, "Well, we think that this is the way to do things," and it might conflict with your coaching. I'm always like, "Sure, yeah, let's go with that,"
Mhm.
because this is what's going to happen. If somebody suggests something, no matter what it is, and
Right.
then you agree to do it, either they're going to be right or they're going to be wrong. And if they're right, then they were right. And if they
Yeah.
were wrong, then you can say, all right, we tried it your way. You were wrong. So let's try it another way.
Yeah.
And that's how you have to kind of look at things to be open minded to find
Mm.
better solutions
Yeah.
because the, there obviously is or can be more than one right answer to solutions.
Sometimes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
if you're able to just at least find one of them, the
Mhm.
the fastest way without arguing and bickering with people, then I think that's a great way to problem solve.
Yeah. I mean, we can look at the correctness of a solution and people's commitment to the solution. So one thing I've learned the hard way is if I have the technically correct solution and I'm in a position to tell people you need to do it this way. Now, I've rarely been in that formal position in my career. But like if I were to tell people, here's the answer, go implement it. It might be highly correct, but if they don't have any commitment to it and they're like, yeah, Mark had this idea, we don't think it's going to work, they're going to be really happy trying it in a half-baked way, and then very quickly say, oh, well, see, we tried it and it didn't work. Where if we were moving forward with their idea, that might have been just as correct or better, or even 90% as correct. One thing I've learned is that people have much more commitment to their idea to not give up when they hit the first road bump in the road. Instead of saying, see, his idea didn't work, they're going to be committed to what do we learn? How do we adjust? We're going to make it work. And that's a huge difference. I'd rather, back to what you were saying a minute ago, Jackson, I'd rather have a team discover on their own and say, that didn't work, that was wrong, instead of me telling them that. Like, let them discover, and hopefully there's an environment where they feel safe admitting we tried something that didn't work at all or didn't work as well as we expected. Like if their organization is going to punish them for that, that's a different cultural challenge, and maybe something I would have to try to coach leaders on.
Yeah, because you can always have that realization after, as I said, you let them make that decision of like, oh, let's do it this way. So, all right, this is your decision. You decided that you wanted to do it this way, and we're going to go with it. We're going to put our all into it. And if it doesn't work, just remember that, this was your decision and it's not my way. And so you're going to find out if what you were thinking was right or not. And it's not really a blame game.
No.
It's just something to say, like this is a way of thinking. Like your
Mhm.
way of thinking led you to this road, and we want to
Right.
analyze how how you process things, how you process information, and how you view your results once you
Mhm.
have gone down that decision making path.
Right.
And if you're able to just take that information and replicate it over time, then you can create habits for that company and those employees or those people.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And I think one of those habits is reflection. Like if something went well, or if you tried something and it didn't work, either way, one thing I was taught about structured problem solving is that the last step of that improvement process is always spend some time reflecting on what you did, what went well, what could have gone better. Even if it went well, like what did we learn? Is there still something else to work on? Because I think when we talk about problem solving, a lot of times a problem doesn't get completely solved. We've made things better, right? Maybe the problem is smaller than it had been before. So part of that reflection would be thinking about, what do we work on next? Do we continue working on this, or is it good enough for now and we go work on a bigger problem someplace else? And if we tried something that didn't work, trying to reflect, as you put it, reflecting in a blame-free way. Let's focus on learning, iteration, doing better the next time. I would say that's healthy reflection, because otherwise, if the reflection or post-mortem, if you will, if it turns into a blame game, people are going to stop participating, or they'll go through the motions and how quick can we get out of here?
Yeah. So something I've noticed, but I've talked to a lot of people who are in the coaching business or consultation business, and most of them, if not all of them, are people who don't like to help immediate startups. And something that I've noticed is that makes sense, because if somebody, it's like, hey, Mark, I just started this business last week. Uh,
Mm,
I'm trying to get my clientele up. I'm trying to make some more money. Can you help me out? The problem with that is if you decide to take that on as a coach, I think you have now become an employee, because
yeah.
they don't have enough resources, they don't have enough information
Mm,
to be able to get themselves going so that you can just coach them.
right.
Because at that point, you're basically working for them as an employee to help them
Mm,
get more clientele or get more revenue. But
yeah.
if they've already established themselves, let's say they've got 3 employees, still, small business, they've got 3 employees and they're making, let's just say, like 100,000 a year, then you can coach them to get to that uh 200,000 a year,
Right.
500,000 a year. But before that, if they're
Mm,
not making anything or making only like 1,000 or 10,000 a year, you've just made yourself an employee of that company.
yeah. 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 I mean, there's, I think, pros and cons to that. I mean, and there's a practical matter of, can they pay you?
Yeah.
Um, How much funding do they have to put into the initial startup and growth? I mean, I think there's pros and cons to it. Like, I think if you find a company that has a mission and a purpose that really resonates with you, you might be more willing to get involved with that. Like, KaiNexus, the software company, when I've never been a full-time employee, but I met the co-founders and they were just coming to market. And I mean, to your point, I mean, I mean, I was kind of an employee, but also an advisor. I was working for Sweat Equity. So that kind of answers the question of, well, okay, how are you going to pay me? And no one pays their mortgage off of Sweat Equity. So that's part of why I wasn't a full-time employee. I was doing other speaking and consulting and other work to sort of, earn the ability to spend time working, with the co-founders and building that business. But I think one great advantage of being involved early on, we talk at KaiNexus a lot about culture. And I'll give the co-founders, Greg and Matt, and some of the other leaders who joined in the first couple of years, I'll compliment them, credit them for their focus on culture, because there's so many things that demand your time as an entrepreneur. You've got to be focused on your product, and in this case, it's software technology and the implementation process. You've got to be very, very focused on your customer. And I think a lot of people um, might put culture on the back burner of all the things I could be working on right now. And when you're a handful of people, culture is just happening. But, as Greg pointed out, and I've had some influence along the way, um, as the company starts growing and as the co-founders aren't interacting with every person every day, now there's danger that the culture drifts off into a direction that you didn't intend. And so I think one of the benefits of being involved early on, I think it's easier to try to be intentional and cultivate culture from the beginning. KaiNexus serves customers that are trying to have a culture of continuous improvement, and that's what our software supports. So as a software company, we've worked really hard to make sure we have a culture of continuous improvement, a culture where people can be candid and speak up and point out problems and disagree with the boss and not get in trouble for that. I think it's easier to cultivate that culture than it is to fix it down the road. I think, culture can be fixed. A good culture could turn bad, but one of the things I do enjoy, about being involved early is that it's kind of a high leverage point. If there's a good connection with the company, the people, the product, the purpose, that happens sometimes.
Yeah, culture can be everything for a lot of people, and I do think that like once you kind of, as I was like alluding to earlier, is like creating those habits. Like once you have people who are in your career field who are like actually creating habits, they're actually setting standards and all
Mhm.
that kind of stuff. It allows it allows everyone who is involved to have an easier transition like into the company and stuff like
Right.
that. Like, I was having a podcast with one guy who does coaching, and he said that like the owner was complaining about one of their employees, and they're like, well,
Mhm.
they seem to never do these tasks right. They're
Yeah.
not doing this, they're not doing that. And he was like, okay, well, who hired that person?
Yeah.
And he said it was like this, awkward silence right there. And he was like, now, do we have a training problem or do we have a hiring problem? Like,
Yep.
is it?
Yep.
And so that kind of like evaluation, that audit that he gave
Mhm.
by realizing that is something that a lot of people really need, is because it's like, oh, yeah, you're right. Like I have no room to complain about people who work for me if
Mhm.
I'm in control of
Mhm.
how they function. And if their habits are bad, then that's because I've allowed it to, one,
Mhm.
I've allowed it to become bad, and two, I haven't corrected it yet.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's music to my ears. And, I think it's never a good look when a leader is blaming their employees. Back to your point, like, hey, you're the owner, you're the CEO, you're the site manager. Um, you've got to look at hiring, training, supervision, ongoing engagement of the employee. I mean, I like one of my um, not a direct mentor, but I've learned so much from his books and his influence. He passed away 30 years ago. W. Edwards Deming, who's kind of a famous American leader in the quality movement. And Dr. Deming would say the leader's job is to coach, not judge.
Hmm.
Like, so he was aiming some of that at annual performance reviews. Like, how many people get blindsided? Like, I thought I was doing great. And now my annual review says does not meet expectations. What the hell? Like that's a huge problem. That's a management problem. If someone's not meeting expectations, they deserve ongoing coaching. That's the job of leaders, is to help pull people up and not just give up on people too quickly. But I think of another person who I did meet. Um, I think has greatly influenced me, or set a great example. Was Paul O'Neill. He passed away just a couple of years ago. He had been the CEO of Alcoa, the aluminum manufacturer. And when he was CEO, and as he was advising others, including healthcare leaders in his retirement, he would always emphasize the responsibility of leaders. Like, everything that happens in this organization is your responsibility. And some leaders seem to not want that responsibility. They will blame and throw employees under the bus instead of really being accountable. And see what everything that's been going on in the news about Boeing. They're now outgoing CEO Dave Calhoun, who's being allowed to retire. Like some of the headlines in the past week have said, he's out at Boeing. Like he's not being fired, he's being allowed to retire. And that might have been his plan anyway by the end of the year. But he's made some comments. He's been CEO for what I think 4 years. He'd been on the board longer than that. And he was basically just bitching and moaning about the Boeing culture.
Hmm.
Like, I mean, like, you should resign immediately. Like, you're the CEO. You don't get to complain about the culture. You should have been influencing that culture. And if you say we've got this culture of people are focusing on pushing airplanes out the door instead of emphasizing safety and quality, Paul O'Neill, as a CEO, would have said that's your job from day one as a leader to set expectations. And culture doesn't change overnight, but when the CEO is telling people and backing up their words with actions when it comes to prioritizing safety and quality, like Paul O'Neill did, I wish somebody at Boeing, hopefully the next CEO at Boeing is going to take that stance. But Dave Calhoun, man, like it or not, everything that happens there is your responsibility. Like with the title and with the great paycheck comes great responsibility.
Yeah, I'm a huge proponent of using the phrase "I have allowed" because
Mm,
if you can have that honesty with yourself, even in like your relationship. If you're married or dating somebody and there's something going on that you are not happy with, the other person isn't meeting your needs or, you're not meeting their needs, you
mhm.
both can use that phrase, I have allowed blank. Because
Yeah.
if you stand, if you aren't making a stand for that, we're talking about the CEO of Boeing. If he's saying like our employees aren't doing this, or aren't doing that, then you didn't make a stand to make a change,
Uh-huh.
and you allowed it. So he could replace all the words he said with, "I have allowed employees to do this. I have allowed employees to do that."
Mhm. That would ring more true to me had he said it that way. No, I love the way you were saying that. Someone else who I've known and interviewed and learned a lot from, Billy Taylor. He was an executive at Goodyear for a long time, and he's now a coach and working with others. I've heard him say a bunch of times, and I think it's so true. As a leader, what you tolerate becomes the new standard.
Mm,
So you could be saying one thing, you could be saying safety and quality has to be the absolute top priority. But if you tolerate people in the organization, yelling and blaming and bullying people around, you need to push those airplanes out. If you're tolerating that, that becomes the new standard. If a plant manager walks past somebody not wearing their safety glasses and they don't say something, that becomes the new standard. If the plant manager isn't wearing their safety glasses, that becomes the new standard. So I just love the way he says that. And it reminds me of the way you were saying it. What you allow becomes the new standard, I think is maybe the way of blending those thoughts together.
yeah, and it's unfortunate that we don't have the ability to control what people want to do, but we can't control people's motivation. I think it was Gary V. I was watching one of his videos, and he was talking about the dumbest thing any business owner can do is be upset at an employee for not caring about the business the way that they care about the business. And
Hmm.
I was like, that's that makes a lot of sense because
Mm-hmm.
they own the business. Why? They just want the money. They want to show up and collect
Mm-hmm.
a paycheck and go home. A lot of people, when it comes to like manufacturing and stuff, if it's something like a small business where
Yeah.
like people, that's their passion, their
Mm-hmm.
passion is to do that, then they probably care a lot more. But if
Yeah.
just like one of many in like a
Yeah.
big corporation and like as I said, like a manufacturing plant where somebody's just like an operator doing something, then
Yeah.
probably just showing up for the paycheck. But yeah, you can't really force people to care and be as passionate as you are if you're the
Mm-hmm.
owner about the business. But as you already explained, you can make sure that there's a standard for what they do every single day, like wearing those safety glasses.
Mhm.
You can enforce that, but you can't enforce the thinking and the mindset of I need to wear these safety glasses to be safe and go home to my family with perfect eye vision. It's, you
Right.
can't force people to have that mindset, but you can enforce like, hey, I need to wear my safety glasses.
Yeah.
I think it's
Yeah.
important for people to understand that.
Yeah. And, and I think, yeah, I mean, sometimes leaders can force compliance, but that's different than commitment.
Yeah.
And I don't think any organization with a compliance culture is going to be excellent or even survive in the long term. And for the time I worked in manufacturing, or there's times in healthcare where there are things that are mandated, and it might be for very good reason, like wearing safety glasses in a factory, or doing certain practices in healthcare to make sure you don't get stuck by a needle, or something that could be really dangerous. I think when people feel disrespected and beaten down, when they're not being engaged, when they don't feel like they have the right level of autonomy to participate in improving the organization, or that they're not being allowed to practice healthcare the way they should, I think people find ways. Like I say, in a factory, I'll bring it back to that example. Like when I started my career at General Motors, there were, the UAW members, the frontline operators were just disrespected, not treated well, not listened to. It was really painful to see. And then I think in the context of that, they maybe kind of lash out a little bit, and they'll say like, well, what I do have control over is I'm not going to wear my damn safety glasses. Make me. And it becomes a grievance and it becomes a fight. And like that's a reflection of culture. I think sometimes when people lash out, or just feel, and it's counterproductive to your point. They know there's risk to their eyes, but they feel like, well, you can't make me, so I'm not gonna. I'm like, that's dysfunctional. I think it's understandable human behavior. We all have to find something where we feel like, hey, I don't have a lot of control, unfortunately, so I'm going to do the thing I do have control over.
Yeah, and I think that I think it's funny that even people have that mindset, but or more or less sad, but it's something that people, if they had that whole commitment over compliance type mindset, then they would see the bigger picture. And I had a safety coordinator say something. It was like the most profound, like simple but crazy thing I'd ever heard when it comes to safety. He said he was talking about people who don't wear their safety glasses or don't wear their earplugs and stuff.
Mhm.
And he was like, it blows my mind that people don't wear their earplugs and don't wear safety glasses because you should actually be mad that we give you safety glasses and earplugs to protect yourself. And that's all we give you
Mm.
because we could literally just make the place less quiet and safer for your eyes so that you didn't have to need any of that.
True.
And I was like,
True.
I've never thought about that. Like
Well,
they're
that's getting to more of the root causes.
yeah. Yeah, they're
Yeah,
the safety team is literally saying, we can't make this place safer, so here's this equipment and good luck." And I
that's
never
a good
really
point.
thought about it like that.
Yeah, no, that's really thought provoking. But I think when it comes back to compliance and commitment, I think that's a reflection of how leaders are behaving or engaging people. I think a lot of leaders fall back on what people might call command and control management habits. I'm the boss. I'm telling you what to do because I have authority. You have to do it. That cultivates compliance. I'm only going to do it because you said so. What can I get away with? That's counterproductive for the organization. Where I think leaders who really engage people um, build commitment. When leaders are listening, when they are acting as servant leaders, and I heard someone actually this morning a podcast I was listening to say like even the fact that we have this phrase servant leadership, like that's a huge red flag. Like leadership should be servant leadership. But so many people's definition of leadership is unfortunately not about serving others. Paul O'Neill, as CEO of Alcoa, was all about serving others. I don't know if he even called it servant leadership. To him, it was just leadership. But yeah, I mean, I think it comes back. Leaders can build commitment. I think leaders can cultivate an environment where people do act like owners, because you're treating them as a partner in the business. And I think part of it, and again, I'll give credit to KaiNexus and the co-founders here. Last year, so many tech companies did layoffs, and it was almost assumed, like if you're a tech company, you were laying people off.
Hmm.
KaiNexus didn't lay anybody off. They never have. The co-founders very intentionally want to manage the company in a way to where they're never put in that position, right? So that means they're choosing kind of more conservative, slower growth, because the reason companies get into that layoff mode is they were over optimistic about their growth. They overhired, the growth didn't come. Now they feel like we have no choice, or they have the financial pressure where there's literally no choice. We're going to lay people off. Well, now people feel like I'm just a transactional cog in this machine. I am useful to you until I am not, and then you're going to throw me away and I'll find another job. Where, this is not an environment of you have a guaranteed job for life. That commitment's not being made. But I think when people realize, like when we went through hard times, we stopped hiring, and that meant we weren't in the position of having to lay people off. I think that's where people start feeling like, wow, I do have this deeper commitment to this organization. I don't like to call a business a family, because you don't leave family generally, right? People choose to leave a business, and sometimes somebody joins and it just isn't a good fit. But that's different than a company that goes through these waves of overhiring, laying off. And then the other thing I think leaders shouldn't complain about is like employees they have no loyalty anymore. And I'm like, I think companies, a couple of decades ago, I think companies started that. People learned companies aren't going to be loyal to them. So we all have to look out for ourselves.
That's 100% true. And I think that, companies definitely, as we were talking about earlier, just creating the culture of loyalty, you would have to show some loyalty, and then people will be inclined to be loyal to you. But once they notice, like, oh, yeah, they don't care what happens to me. This one guy at work, so I work at Owens Corning, like the shingle
Okay.
manufacturer.
Yeah.
And he said, yeah, Owens Corning don't care about you. We have colors, like different colors for the shingles. And he said they
Mhm.
don't care unless your name is Onyx Black. And I was like,
Mhm.
oh. So that's just how he feels about,
Yeah.
the way that the employees are being treated. And
Mm.
or just people in general,
Yeah.
with like the he's saying like our goal is to put out this product, the Onyx Black color. And so that's just something on top of the whole how people feel about the company's loyalty to them.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of people want that 50-50, if not more in favor of themselves, of loyalty and
Mhm.
um, benefits. Like, what can the company give to me
Mhm.
instead of how hard I need to work hourly for them.
Yeah.
There is something I was curious about, is how often do you get to work with just like the employees of a company, as far as like understanding that culture, that environment, to get to know how they feel about it compared to just working with like management? Because I know a
Mhm.
lot of times, sometimes managers have a misconception of either what's going on the floor, or like how the
Mhm.
business is being run, because
Mhm.
they don't talk to the lower level employees, like the people who are
Right.
actually running the place. So
Right.
how often do you get to hear both sides of the story?
Yeah. Pretty often. And, engagements tend to come, there's different types of engagements that come from different directions. So there might be engagements that are really, leader led, starting with them, coaching, educating them, working with them, and trying to cascade some ideas through the organization. There are times when I get pulled into some very tactical operational improvement projects where I'm spending most of my time with frontline employees, frontline team members, maybe their frontline supervisor. Um, so for an example, like one of those projects was with a big hospital on the East Coast, a big city in the Northeast. And, we were brought in, a couple of us as consultants were brought in to help solve a problem. In a nutshell, the problem was a lot of surgeons were really frustrated and beyond angry that a lot of their surgical cases were being delayed because they were waiting on surgical instruments, or those surgical instruments didn't seem to be cleaned and sterilized properly. Right. So that's a huge problem. There's risk to patients. There's irritation to the surgeons. It's, bad for everybody involved. So we, get to go in, roll up our sleeves and work with a team of people from that instrument processing department, they call it sterile processing department, and with some people who worked in the operating rooms to really like kind of build a team that understood the entire cycle of, instrument gets used and it's dirty and it goes down to the basement and it gets cleaned and sterilized and repacked and sent back up to the operating room. So we spent a lot of time studying the work and realizing, the problem here is not that people aren't trying, that they don't care, it's not a people problem, it was a process problem. So we could work with people to identify process problems and really reduce delays in that cycle and improve quality, help ensure that that work was being done the first time. So that was very tactical. You get into the weeds of the process and you're fixing things. In the process of doing that, then you start hearing some of the cultural elements. Are we being, so we're being listened to in this project. Are you being listened to on an ongoing basis? If a lot of that was happening, they might not have needed the project. So then it to varying degrees, depends on how much leadership's willing to open the door on that discussion about what leaders are doing or not doing, what they could be doing differently. Sometimes they say, no, just fix that problem. We need the better performance and we're thrilled to have that. And then, there's other examples where, I think leaders it's varying degrees, right? So in that case, they sort of invited some of that discussion. I still think part of their mental model was that the problem was the workers a little bit, right? And then there are some places where people would have more that viewpoint, as you said so well, that they have allowed these problems to fester. They have allowed employees to have their voices go unheard. There are some things that I've learned and can teach and coach people on. And the other thing I'll add, I think you were really alluding to, sometimes there's a gap. And leaders think their culture is really good, and the frontline employees would tell them something different. So you can do surveys. There's always that question of whether employees really believe the anonymous survey is anonymous. That's a real challenge. Do you get honest feedback? But there are some ways that you can survey a team. We've done this at KaiNexus. I've helped some other organizations with this. You can do, if people aren't surveyed out, you can go and administer a survey that really kind of gets to the question of, do people feel safe speaking up in the workplace? Like, I think that's one of the key, and there's it's not just me. There's a lot of research that shows that's one of the key variables that drive success for a team. If people feel safe speaking up, and that's a reflection of their leaders and how leaders are behaving. So, you can do a survey. You can do a score, you can compare yourself to benchmarks, but more importantly, ask some free form questions. Like, for example, what's one barrier to you feeling safe pointing out problems? Like, those free form responses, are really, really helpful, and hopefully the starting point then for improving what we call psychological safety, so that people do feel more safe speaking up. You can't just say, you should feel safe now. Start speaking up. It's not that easy.
Yeah, and that's something that I've definitely seen with employees and people like that, is like, you can measure how effective leadership is based off of how well the employees who are under them are working. I heard some like really good. I'm a huge football fan, and there was some coach who made a statement saying, um, you can tell how great a leader is by how well the people who they're in charge of perform in their absence. And
Yep.
so if you can see people who, they don't have their manager or whatever around and they perform great, then that tells you that that manager probably one does a great job of training and then two has empowered that person to proactively think and to be able to be independent of their management power, their management skills. And I've seen that at so I've been to like different Owens Cornings, and I went to another one, and I was a bit of complaining about how the operators at my current Owens Corning they may function. I'm like, oh, they don't do this or they don't do that, and I'm talking to another operator at another plant, so they did a very simple job, and they were like, they're like, do you work at a union plant? And I was like, yeah, and they're like, ah. And they were is and I was like, man, this is crazy that another operator said this about the operators at a different plant because they had enough knowledge and wisdom to understand that maybe other another plant if your operators aren't performing well, maybe they're unionized because they don't see the incentive to do better. But a non-union one, you can get pays all over the board. Like somebody could be getting paid one thing and somebody else getting paid another. But union, what everybody's getting paid because it
Right.
has, the pay scale or whatever.
Right.
And it was crazy that an employee like a non-union just operator had the knowledge and wisdom to understand what was going on in our plant. Like they could diagnose our issues, and that tells you how well they're trained and how well they know their job and culture of their plant to be able
Right.
to diagnose another plant.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's so much knowledge and wisdom to tap into, frontline employees and too many organizations just ignore or discount what the frontline employees can do. I mean, one thing I learned going back to General Motors and other workplaces I've been in, like back to the question that we were talking about earlier of, smart, dumb or ignorant. Don't confuse formal education with smarts and creativity. There are a lot of people that were working, UAW jobs. God, they weren't dumb. They just didn't have some of the same educational opportunities that I had or other managers and leaders had. And any leader who looks down on frontline employees, they're the organization's not going to do well. Like I think that this idea of demonstrating respect for people, like it sounds like a bumper sticker or a slogan, but I mean there are some organizations where I mean I've worked in some workplaces where some of the executives would just say really rude and nasty and inappropriate things about the workers and blame them for all the problems and like, well, maybe a lot of the problems are caused by you not really engaging them because you're not really treating them like adults. And I mean, like that, it like looking at some point, look in the mirror. Leaders, I think, get the culture they deserve. I've heard people say sometimes, a company gets the union they deserve. Now, based on how they treated people in the past, doesn't mean that's how leaders would treat people today, but they've got that union now. And I'm not one to blame. It's complicated, right? Back to the idea of, well, someone says we've got a combative union. I'm like, well, at some point management was probably being real combative with them. And you got that union and sometimes union disappears, gets voted out, but it's just part of the reality of it. Back to the point of like, it's better to have a good culture where people don't feel the need to unionize than it is to deal with the aftermath of that decades later.
Mm. And I do think like I've talked to people before that are on our floor and plant floor and like found out that they were extremely intelligent compared
Yeah.
to what it seemed like the supervisors or management were saying they were. I'm just like, oh, we have a communication problem. It's
Mhm.
not a knowledge or um, intelligence problem. We have
Right.
a communication problem because I can tell that this person is capable of doing their job very well,
Yeah.
but management isn't communicating what they need to with the employee. And so it may appear that they're not that smart because they haven't been given the proper information
Yeah.
or they're not being taught the right information. Like a lot of people are taught the right way. Like a lot of people might find the question, how do you learn best? Do you learn best by verbal, reading, visual, stuff like that? They might think that's a silly question, but
Yeah.
some people will literally drastically change their improvement and how well they perform based off of how they're learning. So if you're teaching a
Yeah.
visual learner to just, hey, here's a sheet of paper, read it, and then do it, they're probably going to struggle and they're going to look like they're really stupid. But you're
Mhm.
just teaching them in a way that they don't do
Right.
well. So they're not going to perform well.
Right. Right. Yeah. And even, even if people are, good readers and that's their natural learning style, it's not effective training. You just throw a procedure at somebody, say, read it, you're now trained. Like, business learned, in the 1940s, 1950s, there was a military program called Training Within Industry, TWI. And like, you can you can get trained in how to train people effectively. And it really, comes down to not just talking at them or having them read something, but demonstrating how the work is done, letting them demonstrate it back, letting, like, there's all these steps you go through to confirm that somebody has been trained. That's the other thing I don't want to hear leaders complain about is, well, we trained them and they don't know how to do their job. I'm like, no, you didn't train them well. I mean, that's an indictment of the training, not an indictment of the employee.
So we are getting close to time, but I do want to hit something else. And then this can be part of, I always end it with you giving information about how people can find you and stuff. But you said
Yeah.
you also do podcast. Uh,
Mhm.
Please expand a little bit on that as well.
Yeah. So I started podcasting back in 2006, a podcast called Lean Blog Interviews. So I've been doing that really consistently. It's really based around what's called lean management practices. So been doing that podcast. And then I started one, I'm going to hold up my mug here, uh, September 2020, called My Favorite Mistake. So I've just hit 250 episodes of that podcast. People can go to mistakespodcast.com or search wherever they're listening to that. It's a business podcast where people come on and talk about their favorite mistake. We try to celebrate the learning or something positive that came from a mistake and try to encourage that for others. And then my most recent book is kind of an offshoot of that podcast. It's called The Mistakes That Make Us: Cultivating a Culture of Learning and Innovation. People can learn more at mistakesbook.com. They can go to mistakesbook.com/chapter if they want to get a free preview of the book.
Is there anything else that you like to speak about that you do? Really cool, by the way, that you have the mug. That's awesome.
Yeah,
And the book.
yeah.
But anything else that you want to hit that we didn't get a chance to speak on?
Well, no, I mean, I mean, this has been a great conversation. This, so thank you for the opportunity. And, I hope that, if people are interested in, having a conversation about some of the things that I've shared and talked about today, they can find me. Markgraban.com is my website. I'm on LinkedIn. I'd love to, happy to do a complimentary conversation, just kind of talk about your situation and try to understand what the problem or problems might be. And if there's a way we can test out me helping. So that was not the most articulate way of saying that. But hope people would reach out if they want to talk about some of the applications of these ideas to their team or their company.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on, and it was great
Yep.
getting to know you as who you are and the type of people that you've worked with, and also your style of how you think and how you process how a company should function, because I think that's important. Like as a coach, a lot of people shy away from hiring coaches because they just aren't sure of, like, their style or how they
Yep.
might help them. So it's great for you to be able to explain that, and so people can kind of get a gist of what you're able to do for them if they wanted to hire you. So thank you for coming on and doing that.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for having me, Jackson.
Awesome. Well, thank you for everybody for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.